our next edition of the CBB Review Studio Podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined by Matt Mlodzinski, Ariel Puterman. We are doing weekend game predictions, previews, and games to watch for January 18th and 19th, Saturday and Sunday. We will be going around the conferences. Saturday, pretty much the entire country is playing. It's our time now with college football really winding down. Got a handful of Big Ten games on Sunday, but mostly this is Saturday based. 4 ranked versus ranked matchups overall. And we will start with the SEC. So here we go. These is obviously like the conference that has more than like 50% of the best games in the country. I think the first one I want to talk about was Alabama at Kentucky, top 10 matchup at noon. If you want an NBA style, like high scoring, fast-paced game, this is the game you want to watch. Torvik has both teams getting over 90 in their projections. I don't necessarily have a read as to who's going to win, but I know this is the game I'm most looking forward to this weekend. Matt, if you want to elaborate on Alabama, Kentucky, talk about some other game, what are you thinking on this slate for the SEC?
Yeah, I mean, look, Alabama, Kentucky is pretty much the game of the week in college basketball, not just the SEC. Like, if you follow this sport, and it's a noon tip-off, so it's real easy. You don't got to stay up for this game. It's just roll out of bed, throw on this game, and you get to watch some of the best players in the country go at it. But obviously, there's other games in this conference that I want to mention. I'm going to go with one that you're probably not going to expect right here, though. That's South Carolina and Oklahoma. And I think that even as we stand right now, the weekend of January 18th and 19th, every single SEC team still has a path to make the NCAA tournament as an at-large team, right? South Carolina had a non-conference win over Clemson. They've struggled in SEC play. Them and Oklahoma both don't have an SEC win. One of them can get that. We saw what South Carolina was able to do in their game against Auburn, just not able to pull it out. Could they finally get an okay win over Oklahoma? Could Oklahoma and Porter Moser start to turn things around? I think that's an intriguing game from a very low level about can one of these bottom feeders in a very good conference start to rise up a little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Matt. Not the one I would have picked, to be honest, but Porter Moser in conference play just can't get it done. So this will be by far his easiest test of SEC play. So it'll be interesting to see if he can get a win in the win column there. 2 games I'm looking at are Georgia, Auburn, and I'll talk a little about this one first. Georgia's undefeated at home this season. They've beaten a couple big opponents there already. They beat Oklahoma, who we just talked about. They beat Kentucky at home. Auburn probably without Janai Broome again. They struggled a little bit against South Carolina on the road when he did get hurt in that second half. It'll be really interesting to see who comes out on top there. This would be obviously a huge win for Georgia. I would say they're already they're not a lock for the tournament just because the SEC is so tough and they can drop a lot of games, but this win would go a long way. Meanwhile, for Auburn, if they can win this game without Janai Broome on the road in a hostile environment, I think this really proves that it's them, number one. Everyone else is way below them, even though Duke's looked awesome. Other one I'm looking at is Arkansas against Missouri. Arkansas 0-4 in conference play so far, first year under John Calipari. Missouri's coming off a big road win against Florida. So I think this is a big path crossing for both teams. If Mizzou can win this game, they advance to 4-1. They're looking like a tournament team who could even be a favorite in the tournament. Meanwhile, Arkansas, if they fall to 0-5, it's going to be hard to climb out of that hole, especially with the SEC being so talented. So I think this is a must-win for Arkansas if they want any chance of salvaging their season. And Missouri's not going to give it to them easily. So 2 really big games there. Obviously a lot more, but I'm just going to focus on those 2 for now.
Yeah, it's kind of come out of nowhere that Missouri 3-1 in SEC play in this conference. And I would say they could very easily, I would say almost even likely, get to 4-1. So that definitely goes a long way, even though I think they will eventually lose games in the chunks when they play, better teams consistently. But I also, Auburn, Georgia, like I picked Georgia before the week. Based on what happened earlier this week, they just lost big to Tennessee. I don't know if I necessarily feel that way. Also, Auburn played really well without Janai Broome. A couple more games I want to give honorable mentions to. Mississippi at Mississippi State. We got to talk about that. That's a ranked rivalry game. And Ole Miss is 4-0, a really good chance to put themselves in a good position here, getting to 5-0 in SEC play.
Yeah.
Also, Tennessee at Vanderbilt is of note, although I think there's no reason Tennessee does not blow them out of the water. I just want to note that because a rivalry in-state game. But anything else?
Look, every one of these games is watchable.
Exactly. So that is the SEC. Every one of these games is watchable. I don't know if I would say the same thing about this next conference. We're going to talk about the ACC, where I think only a couple of these games are really watchable. The first one is watchable because of one team and, one particular player, national player of the year candidate, even favorite potentially after this weekend, depending on what continues to happen. But number 3, Duke going at Boston College. Duke's going to win by 30, but I think anytime Cooper Flagg's on the court these days, it is much watched TV. And obviously, with Janai Broome missing some time, he could make up some ground, perhaps surpass Janai Broome, Cooper Flagg, that is, in the National Player of the Year race. And then Clemson at Pitt is another game. I think two of what I think are tournament teams at the moment. Neither of them are safe bets. I think Duke is really the only safe bet in the conference. And Pitt, hopefully they could bounce back. I think they've done pretty well, but I'm going to say Pitt at home is going to bounce back against Clemson. Those are really the 2 games I'm circling.
Yeah, and I'm also looking at Stanford and North Carolina. Look, the program builder in Kyle Smith, right? He just does it everywhere he goes, and Stanford is off to a decent start in ACC play. They're 3-3. Don't really have a win over any top ACC team, so I think this is a real chance for him to finally start to really build this team in year 1 at Stanford. But for North Carolina, it's important too, right? Because UNC had a bad non-conference, and in a bad ACC, you can't afford to have many losses like this. So I think for North Carolina, it's a little bit of a trap game at home. And for Stanford, it's a way to really kind of prove yourself, especially with these newcomers in the ACC, not really doing much so far, right? Like SMU is kind of the only one that's been okay. Still wouldn't even say they're a tournament team at this point in time. Everyone else has been kind of mid. So maybe Stanford picks up a big win in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, I think this is a momentum building weekend for some teams, and those teams are North Carolina and Wake Forest. Both came into conference play really struggling, not looking like tournament teams. Since then, they're both 4-1 on 4-game win streaks. Both teams very winnable games. Obviously, North Carolina's at home. Wake Forest on the road against Virginia Tech, which could be a little bit of a trap game, but Wake Forest is a lot better team talent-wise, so they can keep winning these easy games, build momentum, increase that win streak to 5, 6, 7, 8. People are going to start to take notice, and there's no better way to do that than games like this. Also, that Clemson-Pittsburgh game, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier. I think this is probably a must-win for Pittsburgh. They really don't have the resume right now, and this is probably their best opportunity to pick up that quad 1 win playing Clemson at home. If they can't win this game, really not a lot of opportunities left, so keep an eye on for this one, see how competitive they are, and if they could pull out the victory there.
Yeah, that's the problem with the ACC. Losing individual games is a lot worse than winning them would be good. And you really got to rack them up in quantity. Like Wake Forest has an opportunity, I guess, on the road against Virginia Tech. Losing that is going to do a lot more than winning that would do. And that's really the problem with how bad the conference is right now. Also, honorable mention before we move on, Florida State, I want to look at them. They're hosting Georgia Tech. They've been playing a lot better basketball lately. They're coming off of a double-digit win over Pitt. Just one of those crazy, volatile teams. They could put together a really good 40 minutes. They could put together a 40 minutes that makes them look like a bottom 100 team in the country. So I don't think they'll be sustainable enough to win enough games to make the tournament, but definitely a team you have no idea what's going to come. So just wanted to note that. But on to better conferences. We got the Big Ten, and we got the top is the Saturday games and the bottom is the Sunday games. I think, of course, if we're starting with Saturday, the first game to note is Purdue at Oregon. Oregon has been on the plus side of some really close games. I think they're 4-1 is what I looked up, maybe 5-1 in one possession games. Purdue, on the other hand, they're absolutely rolling. I think the Boilermakers take this on the road. What do you guys think? Just this individual game.
Gosh, I got to go with Oregon. I know that Oregon's had some tough games, but I feel like that's it's a difficult place to play. They're a new team to the Big Ten, so it's not like Purdue and especially Matt Painter are used to going in Oregon and playing games inside that arena. So it's going to be a new experience for everyone on that program. I feel like Oregon's up for this game. Oregon, you don't have many games like that in the Pac-12, right? You have some long-time rivalries, but when's the last time Oregon played Purdue? So I think the fans are going to be up for this. I think it's just going to be the support they get at home can help put them over the top in a very even game. Like I know I mentioned Alabama, Kentucky is the game of the week, but this one rivals that because it's a game that we don't see often, and there's just a lot of intrigue here. You got two of the best guards in the Big Ten and in the country in Braden Smith and Jackson Shelstad.
Yeah, it's really hard to win on the road, and I totally agree with you. This is one of the best guard matchups you'll see all season between Smith and Shelstad. The only reason I'm going to lean Purdue and go with Dan here is just watching how Illinois played against Oregon when they played at Oregon. They just killed them in all aspects of the game. And I don't think Purdue will do the same, but I think they have the blueprint to beat Oregon at home. And I think they have the talent as well. Since they made those changes to starting lineup, they've looked like a completely different team than that one that got crushed by Auburn and came out of the gates a little bit slow. So I'm going to go with Purdue here. I think it'll be like a 2 to 3 point game, though.
Yeah, shout out Caleb First. Didn't expect that to really arise. But yeah, that's Purdue, Oregon. Also another ranked versus ranked matchup. So the Big Ten has two as well this week. Illinois at Michigan State. I think this is also going to be a really, really good game. I think both of these teams, especially on Illinois' side, are better than their AP poll ranking. Not saying their AP poll ranking is not deserved because that's a resume-based ranking, but I think both teams in true talent and true future ability are better than those rankings, especially Illinois. I don't have a great read on this. I'm taking Michigan State at home, I think, but if either of you guys want to either talk about this or talk about another game, I'll open the floor.
Well, I think from a conference where all 6 teams that are ranked are so tight and there's not much saying who's the best team in the Big Ten, we might get a better idea between who wins Purdue, Oregon, and who wins Illinois, Michigan State, because whoever wins those matchups just added another top 20 win to their resume and, can kind of separate themselves a bit. I still think that the Big Ten is just so mixed together at the top that who knows if it really matters, but I'm trying to search for, okay, who is one team we can point our finger on and say they could be the team that finally wins the championship in the Big Ten. And I just don't think there's a lot of separation right now. There's a lot of great teams. So that's a storyline to look to.
Just seeing what Illinois has been doing on the road recently has been pretty incredible. I mean, like we talked about earlier, they beat Oregon by over 30 on the road. They beat Washington by 4, so not a great win there. But then they come back and they beat Indiana by 25 on the road. They're a really good road team. They did lose that USC game, but that was without Kasparas Jakušionis, who's a top 3 pick in my opinion. He's healthy now. They're explosive. I think they get done. I think they also realize that if they lose this game, they probably can't win the Big Ten because Michigan State will be undefeated. They'll have 3 losses. It's going to be hard to cover that ground, and they want to win this conference. So I think they bring their A game and they get it done.
Yeah, other games, Wisconsin's going on the road. I think USC is just not a great team. So I like Wisconsin there. And then Michigan, could they bounce back? They're coming off of a tough overtime loss to Minnesota on that buzzer beater on Thursday. And then Northwestern just upset Maryland in overtime. So Northwestern coming off an overtime win, Michigan coming off of an overtime loss. That's of note. Also Nebraska, Maryland. But that's what I've got for the Big Ten. As far as the Big 12 is concerned, we got a pretty, loaded slate in terms of quantity. A couple of top 10 teams going on the road that I wanted to note. First off, Iowa State, second ranked in the country, going to West Virginia. West Virginia, by the way, they've had some clunkers, but they've also had a really impressive group of wins this year. They've won against Kansas. They've won against Arizona. They've won against Gonzaga. And Milan Momcilovic is out for Iowa State. So I don't know what the spread will be. I don't even think it'll be that large, but I think West Virginia wins this one at home. Also, Houston at UCF. I'm not as much sure about UCF pulling this one off, if we're being honest, because last time UCF played an elite defense at home, they dropped an absolute dud against Kansas. They lost by like 50 points. I'm not saying that happens here, but I'm not confident in UCF. But definitely Iowa State, I think, is in some trouble here.
Yeah, there's a lot of underrated games. The Big 12 is an example of a conference where not every game might be a ranked matchup, but there's still some very important ones here. I'm gonna look at BYU at Utah, right? You get both teams in Utah playing each other. BYU, in my bracket, is maybe just a little bit outside, so they could really use a win here over a decent Utah team. But again, any road win against a power conference team can help out. I think that can just be a really cool game to watch. And then Arizona at Texas Tech, right? I mean, Arizona on a 7-game winning streak, 5-0 in the Big 12. They could really solidify themselves as we could say, okay, you know what? Arizona had some struggles in the non-conference, but they might be back if they improve to a 6-0 in the conference. Texas Tech is playing like a tournament team. That's just a very quality basketball game right there at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Texas Tech's an interesting one. I think this is a really crucial game for them. You look at their resume, their best win right now is BYU. Second best win's arguably Syracuse. And Matt, no disrespect to your Orange, but anytime Syracuse is your second best win, that's not something you want to brag about. They have a really good chance at home. They should have won against Iowa State last week, couldn't get it done, couldn't get that signature win. Now they get a second chance here against Arizona, who, like Matt mentioned, has really turned it around. I think this is a really important game for their resume. They'll obviously get a lot more opportunities this year, but just having it this early, really important for the rest of their season. And speaking of the rest of a team's season, game to circle here is Arizona State and Cincinnati. Both teams pretty good non-conferences, picked up a bunch of quality wins. Haven't really translated to the Big 12 so far. Both teams are 1-4. Cincinnati started 0-4, got the win yesterday or a couple days ago. Arizona State 1-4 as well. They've lost 3 in a row. So neither team wants to start 1-5. It's hard to come back from 1-5, especially in the Big 12. That's not as good as it has been in years past, but it's still going to be competitive. So I think whoever wins this game gets their season back on track. I think it's going to be Cincinnati at home.
Well, I do want to disagree real quick. I don't think that Syracuse is Texas Tech's second best win because Northern Colorado and DePaul are both above Syracuse in the net ranking. So give some respect on those teams, Ariel.
Man, I don't think that's worth arguing for if you're a Texas Tech fan.
But yeah, I mean, Baylor also one of the teams to watch as well. I think they could get back into the mix, like in the same sense as Arizona did. I know Baylor has the number next to their name. I don't think they're quite there yet, but I think they can get there. I think just like shooting variance in terms of Baylor, especially on defense, like they're not a bad enough defense to be giving up 38% from 3 over the course of a full season. They've had some teams get stupid hot against them. So I think they kind of regress a little bit towards the mean and win some more games. But that's the Big 12. Big East. Only 3 games, but 3 pretty decent ones. I guess I would say 2 pretty decent ones and one that exists. Marquette hosting Xavier, 6-0 in the conference. That's Marquette. And I think they take care of business. I've watched Marquette. I've watched them play their A game. I've watched a lot of them play a lot of times they've played their C game and still found ways to win and win comfortably. So I think Marquette gets it done against Xavier for that reason. I think they're just a really high floor team. And then Creighton at UConn. I mean, I think if UConn loses, they really like Marquette's really in that driver's seat. I have them on the upset watch. UConn, that is hosting Creighton. I'm not in love with that UConn front court. They're true bigs, and Kalkbrenner, he's had some bad games, but when he goes off, which is pretty often, it's against very specific types of teams, and it's with teams that just don't have anything to match his length. And I think like UConn with their 2-center rotation, they're a little bit flawed at the 5 position. So I think Kalk has a big game, and I think Creighton could pull off the upset very easily here.
Yeah, and look, I think it's worth mentioning too that Kalkbrenner's record against UConn, Dan, do you know what it is?
What is it?
7-2.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So very and again, that's with games with Donovan Clingan, a lot of those games. So this is a Creighton team and a player in Kalkbrenner that have had a lot of success against UConn. And as you mentioned, now that it's a UConn team without a great front court, I think the Creighton has a great shot of going into UConn and winning that basketball game. And look, I know that Xavier Marquette and Creighton UConn are more of the marquee matchups, but this is Kadari Richmond's return to Seton Hall. So I think it's worth mentioning that that's going to be a fun game at the Prudential Center if there are more than 3,000 fans because the crowds have been awful for Seton Hall games this season. But that is one game that no matter what Seton Hall's record is, and obviously it's very bad, that I think could be a fun one in Newark.
I'm interested to see how Marquette and St. John's come out. Both their games last game escaped with narrow wins and looked pretty flat. Marquette took DePaul to overtime, and DePaul better than Syracuse for what we know, but not better than a lot of teams this season. So the fact that Marquette was even battling with them is pretty surprising. St. John's brought Georgetown at home, and Georgetown's a lot better than we thought. So no disrespect to Georgetown there, but St. John's should have comfortably beat them at home, and they only really pulled away at the end. It was back and forth throughout the whole game. So much easier opponents this time. Marquette obviously at home. St. John's playing an inferior opponent. So seeing how they come out, are they going to come out firing? Are they going to start slow again? I think they'll tell us a lot about the rest of the season based off how they perform in those two games.
And then in terms of mid-major games to watch, I think there have been weekends that have had a lot more loaded slates in terms of mid-major games compared to this weekend. There's a couple that I want to note. I think the first one is Gonzaga. They're hosting Santa Clara. That's on the late night on the East Coast. Santa Clara's, we talked about them a lot on our preseason top 100. Like, they're a sneaky, solid team. I think they're playing their best basketball right now. And if you guys were up late last night, Thursday night, the West Coast Conference race is now wide open. There's a lot of one-loss teams. And why is that? It's because Oregon State took down Gonzaga in overtime at home. It was like the first time they played them in like 50 years. So nice, or at home, I believe. So nice little sneaky good matchup there. But I think that's all we're going to get is like sneaky good matchups. No like marquee mid-major games this weekend unless am I missing something?
I mean, I've got George Washington, George Mason in an A10 battle right there. Can one of them pull ahead? I've got Loyola against Dayton, right? Like, Dayton has been struggling mightily. Loyola is not a great team, but it could be a confidence booster if they get a win over them. And then I have UNLV against San Diego State, a UNLV team that, just pulled off a pretty big win over Utah State. Maybe they can continue that trajectory against the Aztecs. But you mentioned no like marquee mid-major games, like top two teams in a conference that are both maybe vying for at-large bids. I don't really see that on this slate, but there are some games here and there.
I agree with you guys. I have nothing else to add on mid-majors.
Yeah.
Watch ACC or watch the SEC this week. And
Conference USA, that's a really underrated conference. They have Middle Tennessee is hosting Western Kentucky, but that's at like the 7:00 Eastern time. There's probably a lot better games on. But I want to mention that because Conference USA needs more love. Conference USA and Big West are like the trendy mid-major conferences this year. Hopefully there's a 2-bid Big West. I would really hope for that. That would be pretty cool. But yeah, that does it for today's edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our channel here on YouTube if you like our content. We will be churning more stuff out as we approach March Madness sooner than you think. And yeah, that will do it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and take care.